Surviving You Always is the latest film by Morgan Quaintance, a London-based artist and writer. He screened his film, Missing Time, at last year's edition of IFFR. Surviving You Always is presented as a world premiere at the festival. Amanprit Sandhu is a curator and writer based in London. She was a co-founder of the curatorial collective Dam Projects, and together with Ulrika Flink, she is the co-curator of the 2021 Boras Art Biennial, which includes Morgan Quaintance as one of the participating artists.
Hi, Morgan. So I've got some questions for you, but really they're just prompts to get us to talk about the work. And some of them might resonate, and some of them might be, the prompts that make you say, actually, no, this is what I was trying to do with the work. But we've got 30 minutes to, think about talk about the film. I guess the thing I want to kind of start with, and what I was really excited about, was the texture of the film and how sound and image intersected, and knowing the films that you've made before as well, how it feels like it's very much a development of what you've been experimenting with when it comes to sound and image. And I just wanted to start by just asking you sort of, how are you thinking about the still photographs, the moving image and the sound? Like, what came first, the narrative, or how you were going to start piecing that together?
Well, I think that's quite a complex question, but let me see if I can, as they say, unpack it. Yeah. So I think what came first was, I suppose, the narrative, because it's not really fiction. It's something. It's an event that happened to me. It was part of my life when I was sort of a teenager. So I think I mentioned. I think one of the things that was happening to me around the time I made the film was that I found myself really, really focusing on that particular time of my life. Like, I don't know about you, but I sometimes have these moments where I sort of revisit events. I mean, this is involuntary, but like there might be a specific period in my life that I'll go back to, and it will recur in conscious reflection, but also, it might visit me in dreams. It might visit me in like random emotions that are happening. And I think, so what was happening around this time was that I was just returning all the time, frustratingly so, to when I was a teenager, and re-dealing with things that I thought I'd already gotten over sometimes, and then finding myself really reflecting on events that I thought I might have dealt with as well. And then I have like a set of photographs that I took across the 90s, and they seem to have stayed with me throughout all the different house moves I've made in my life. So, I had loads of pictures, and they've all been whittled down to about a dozen. And of the dozen, some of them are feature in the film. And so I think essentially what happened was this sort of personal time travel type thing, existential time travel that I was taking part in involuntarily, coupled with, I actually did a house move. So coupled with me like looking at this material again, and then having some film stock and wanting to make a work, that all sort of came together. It's sort of the perfect storm, and it was time for this thing to come out. Then I knew that texture would be important in the film, because the photographs that I took were, I'm not sure if some people listening may be photographers, so they'll know, well, I don't know if this is specific to the UK, but in the late 90s, Lomo cameras had this big resurgence. And I bought a Lomo, and I think I took like 2 rolls of film before maybe either I sold it or I lost it by moving house. But the texture of the images is something that I always was attracted to. And then sonically speaking, I've always been interested in sound that feels as if it has a history. So I tend not to work with pure sound. What I mean by pure sound is like sound completely generated in a computer. I tend to work with sound that's lived in the world at some point. Like there's this guy, sound designer called Ren Kleiss, who talks about world think it's welding or weldizing. It might be a Walter Murch thing as well. But, you know, it's the thing of like, they play sounds they've made into a space so that the space becomes part of the sound as well. And so for this film, I wanted to work with sound like that, like sound that had you could hear it had some sonic history in the real world, even if it's like room sound, echo, that's the most obvious. But I think tape hiss and a noise, the stuff that you usually try and get rid of, these things to me reflect a kind of lived, it's about tape, it's about material being moved and about grain, so I'm responding to the grain in the Lomo photographs. I'm amplifying the grain in the sound, and then the film, grain is really, really important too. So I just wanted to sort of double down on the possibilities of exploring that as an effective device, but also as a way to craft some interesting abstract images,
Yeah.
So,
how intuitive, I guess there's two questions off what you said. How intuitive is that sort of process? Because when I've sort of asked you before, and I was talking to you about the different kind of narratives that I read into the work, you said that there was actually one narrative that ran throughout the work. And then, the question is, when these still photographs and like the moving image, and I liked what you just said about kind of a sonic history it's from somewhere, and there's definitely moments, and for me it's when you have the sound of the young people talking about what they wear on different levels, that kind of worked really well. But I just want to kind of get a sense of, when did you know what bits were coming into the work, and how did that, does that happen for you just in terms of being a filmmaker quite intuitively, or is it like piecing components together and then
it's a bit of both. So there's like a period of like crisis, where you're like, what's going on, what am I doing? Also because I had to buy the stock, I had to, like, it just so happened that during like the pandemic, I really wanted to make work. I had a certain amount of stock, and I knew I sort of had a limited time to do it because the lab was going to close as well. You know what I mean? It was like everything was threatening closing down. So it's like, I've got to make something. But like I say, because I was just responding to things that were happening to me, like psychologically and emotionally. It was already there, and it all really just sort of fell into place when I started to work on the first image, which is the image of I think my 14th birthday party, and then I had the image, and then I started to write, and as soon as I wrote about my accidental fire where I set my room and everything burnt, it was almost the entry point into this story, into this account that had a kind of velocity of its own. Like once that began, it just pulled me into it, and then I just responded and followed, and didn't try to embellish it or dress it up with like rhetorical ornamentation. I wanted to make sure that it was clear, and that I didn't want to use any like artifice to get to the heart of the matter. I just wanted it to be plainly sort of spoken. So from that point of entry, and the decision to speak about things in that way, the decision to use text on screen, so everything just began to fall into place, really. And then at that point, it became really quite intuitive. After this sort of points of deliberation, then it became really intuitive. And I knew that I wanted to have certain sequences where where motion was slowed down, but in such a way that it almost became like an image, like a painting. I wanted it to be like, so it was just like one frame moving, and I really wanted it to be like, for want of a better way of describing static images, like a painting. Yeah.
but I think like abstraction and affect came in my mind, you know, sort of was kind of, it was very much there when I was looking at or watching the film, which I've, you know, watched a number of times. But I want to kind of go back to like what you said about the narrative, and that, you know, you had this, you wrote the kind of sort of main narrative, but there's some really kind of important moments in that opening sequence, being one of them, where you've got three things going on, you know, for the viewer to, and it takes a while to adjust to that as well. There's the subtitles, and that you're reading the main narrative, which talks about that party, and then also, you're burning down the bedroom. And then there's also a voiceover as well, which is talking about sort of expanded consciousness. And then there's the image that I've spoken about. And I just wanted you to kind of maybe talk a bit about that, because that's really sort of how, like, you start piecing together, okay, well, what am I kind of looking at? What am I hearing about? Is this about kind of memory? Is it about expanded consciousness and drugs? And it takes a while for all of that to settle. Yeah. So I just want you to maybe talk a bit about that as well.
It's not about that really. And I think that's one of the things that if people don't view the film like with a certain level of concentration, then they might just fall into thinking, it's just about psychedelics and expanding consciousness, or it's about being a teenager. It's not about, you know, those just happen to be some of the things that help you on the way to I guess the overarching exploration of like loss and like love and emotion that the film is exploring. But nevertheless, in order for you to create a vehicle to successfully deliver that effective experience to somebody, it has to have like, I can't remember who talks about it, it has to have the right object correlative. It's got to have the right set of events to set off that response in you, the viewer, right? And I think when I started to write this account, I was doing a lot of research into psychosis. And so this was important, I think, for me as well, because I felt like that particular period in my life was a moment of real high contradiction and mad juxtapositions. And I felt like something about that was essential to the experience of being, say, a working class person in London, in like a multicultural metropolis that architecturally has lots of classes collapsing on to each other, and lots of spaces nested against each other and interlaced that really, really shouldn't be next to each other in some ways. You know, whereas like Paris has like this real separation, the banlieues are out there and the city's here. In, say, Chicago, you have housing projects, they're segregated and they're separated from different places. In London, it's everyone's sort of on top of each other.
Yeah.
And I think that like, that sort of architectural sort of spatial planning also gets reflected in the way people's lives intersect and clash and cross over. So that was important, just the notion of things clashing and crossing over. And I felt one of the major things about when I was a teenager, and that's been consistent, is that you know, life is much more complex than it's usually accounted for. And accounts of kind of working class metropolitan living in the UK tend to fall into the category of like kitchen sink drama, where nobody has access to like the transcendental, the metaphysic, anything like that. It's just like basically, you know, I've got a lot of respect for Ken Loach, whatever, but I'm just saying like all we're given is this sort of like realist account of life, but we're not able to move beyond that into somewhere kind of different. And so I felt like what had happened as a teenager with this like experience of psychedelics sort of set up was an example of this like fertile juxtaposition of experience, given that like I'm living in an urban environment surrounded by bricks and stone, and yet I'm ingesting drugs that are supposed to connect me to some grand metaphysical realization of my own experience. And yet I also wanted to interrogate that notion which is a very Orientalist, sort of North American or West Coast conception of what expanded consciousness is supposed to be and how you're supposed to get there. So there is one narrative in the film, and that one narrative is with the text. And then I set up this dynamic between the text and the spoken word, which is oppositional in one sense. So in the first phase, where Timothy Leary is discussing this community where everyone's sitting around on bean bags, and it's got, you know, this sort of so that's juxtaposed against my own sort of urban environment, which is very, very harsh, like my room's burnt. And then there's also this serendipitous relationship between the spoken word and the written text, which isn't about meaning, but is about sound and words. So there could be moments where, you know, he's discussing an inventory of what's in the room that he is in. And then you're looking at the room, which is mine, but you're also aware that all of those items burnt. And I like that dynamic. I wanted to set up a kind of one of the things about the film is to set up this psychological dynamic where you're actively doing things. Your mind is imagining different things happening, you know, so it's a kind of participatory viewing. And then in later scenes when I'm discussing my relationship to the woman, and I think it's Leary again discussing cells and the texture of skin. And, you know, really what he's saying is irrelevant, but the way that skin, texture, cells almost lends another a level of intimacy and closeness to the story I'm telling about my relationship with this other person. So, yeah, all across the film, I wanted to have this like, this back and forth, this like, this, and that's drama, isn't it? That's drama. And I knew, I was like, okay, this story keeps coming back to me. And it's not only just like important because it happened to me or something, but it has more to say. And it has more to say because it has these dramatic elements inbuilt into it. And there's so many ways it can be sort of spun out and sort of touch on other discourses and other experiences.
Yeah. So this is more a comment, but it really did come into its own when the scene that you've just described, where there's the Timothy Leary, you know, sort of voiceover or like the narrative you can hear, and then I guess kind of it comes into its own in terms of what you've been talking about, affect and a sensory account, which, you know, also because for me this film's about memory and love. Those are the overarching themes that felt were there throughout. Again, that's one of the points that where all of these things that you're playing with formally and kind of in terms of themes come together. But something I wanted, because you could touch on quite a bit with what you've just said, and one of the things that we spoke about was the title and where that came from. And I want to bring it up again because some of those complexities that you're talking about, you know, being in the world and reducing some of these discussions down to just simple binaries. I'm talking about, in not so many words, identity, but more than that, being as well. I just want you to maybe just talk a bit about the choice of like using the title of the film is from the title of a song by the punk band, LA punk band Saccharine Trust. And I know this is like they're not just a band that you came across like sort of doing a Google search. This is someone that, you know, a band that you feel like a real kind of connection to.
Yeah.
I just thought it would be interesting to hear a bit about that.
So Saccharine Trust is a band that's been important to me for years. And like, I just talk quickly about them as a band and then I'll discuss like why the title is important. But, you know, I've always been attracted to music that pushes the form to its absolute limits. So the idea, you know, on the surface, they're a punk band, but really they're much more than that. They like, to me, that style of music is really the nexus of many, many different influences. So blues, punk, jazz, avant-garde experimentation, it all comes together. And over the top of it, there's this person delivering a really open account of their own fragility, and that's what really attracts me to that group, as opposed to any other sort of like macho or posturing macho or posturing kind of so-called punk groups.
Yeah.
And I was really interested in when I was young, and like have been and was listening to them a lot over the past year. And the title, so the title of the film is a title from one of their albums. So one of their albums is called Surviving You Always. And the reason it was important to me was because I felt like it really explains experience. That is, we're all, like, I felt like I'm surviving that experience that is in the film always. Like it's not a part of me. And the same with the relationship or the missed relationship that took place. You know, I always feel like I'm still here regardless of it, but and I feel like everybody can relate to that. Everybody is surviving something, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like a tragic thing. It can also be kind of a beautiful declaration that, you know, when you have long-term relationships or things come into your life that have affected you, you know, they may yield scars, but you can wear them with like a badge of honor, and because they've made you who you are, type thing, or they've allowed you to be human because you're able to exercise the full range of emotion, you know, rather than having this sort of middle existence. So I knew, you know, I kind of knew from the beginning that I wanted to title it that. So I contacted Saccharine, I contacted the singer of Saccharine Trust, and I was like, "Do you mind if I?" And he was like, "Do what you want." And I was like, you know, I was like, "That's exactly the spirit." And I was so glad that, you know, he was responded in that way. And that's why at the end, it's an extract from a piece of music called "A Human Certainty," which was another possibility for the title. And you know, so the lyrics in the song that closes the film are really important as well. They function as a kind of what's the word? Is it epilogue? They close the film, and they kind of explain almost the human the experience that led me to make the film in the first place. So yeah, completely not arbitrary and super important. Yeah.
And I guess like the other two things that I want to kind of focus in on is maybe things that I kind of, you know, there were moments again within the film that I wanted to just, you've touched upon one of them already, but there's the bit at the end, which I thought was a really beautiful way. Again, it's the sort of narrative that you read where there's this moment where you're saying goodbye to someone, but it's done in a very, I guess kind of in an everyday mundane way. Again, that sort of really captures both things that I think the film's trying to kind of play with, both anchoring it in a sort of space that's a time as well, that's kind of quite sort of mundane, if that makes sense. And what I mean by that is that you situate some of these things in, I guess, kind of the everyday. And a good example is the ending, where it's, you know, two types of endings, but there's this kind of scene that you set up where you're saying bye to someone, and it's, you're not going to see them again. And then there's you kind of describing you running off, and it's to avoid the rain, and also her trying to keep the dogs out, you know, all the dogs escaping. So there was that, which I kind of feel like you capture that whole sort of parts of the film that's quite abstract, and then also the kind of mundane. And again, when you have the young boys describing themselves and what they wear and what that means to them against the backdrop of the fireworks. And I'm bringing those two examples out because for me, they kind of also sum up something in the film that's kind of carried all the way through. And I just wanted you to maybe, you know, and maybe I'm focusing on this a bit too much, and it's not like, you know, an important element, but I felt like that was something that was successful in terms of, yeah, how those two things intersected So just wanted you to, I guess I just want you to comment and maybe talk
Yeah.
about that.
I mean, I agonized over, well, I don't know if agonized isn't the right word, but, you know, the ending and the way that text happened, again, I was just like, just write it as it happened, you know, just be straight and the weight will come, you know? And I suppose I read a lot of Raymond Carver, and he's the man when it comes to, like, you know, just you know, just say what happened. But I really wanted that last line. I remember you. You know, I really wanted that to be like, I really wanted there to be something, something affirmative about that, and something that it's not. We use word. I've used words like memory because sometimes language isn't successful enough at kind of explaining exactly what it is I want to get at. But the possession, emotional possession, you know, I have that. That's all, you know, regardless of the fact that we went through all of this, and I can't, the people we were is gone, and the person she was is gone, and we can't do that again. I still have that experience. We were that at some point. And I'm getting kind of emotional, like thinking about it, actually, like, but yeah. And I think the stuff about the young boys discussing what they were wearing, that was also a way, I mean, that was a way to situate it in a kind of lived experience of people who are from this city, you know, and from that time. They'll know exactly why that's important. It's really, really specific, the way they're speaking, what they're speaking about. And I just thought that was a really beautiful moment of kind of this is a bit of a cold term, but self-actualization. You know, they're discussing themselves, discussing value, and the film itself is me being me. There's many things happening in the film. It's not just a film about one thing, you know.
Yeah.
But one of the elements in it is a celebration of that time, is a celebration of the contradictory and complex nature of being working class in a city like London in that decade, and possibly still a bit now. But I think some of those possibilities have vanished because of like the neoliberal city, the disappearance of public space, the lack of employment, the lack of jobs, how expensive it is to live here, you know? And yeah, I think again, that thing between the everyday and then the more abstract and the more sort of consciously consciously sort of beautiful moments. That again, that's that same thing of like not wanting to shy away from a dynamic, not a dichotomy, you know, not a binary, but where you're oscillating, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're moving between these things, because I feel like that is what typifies. I think it's probably what typifies a great many of our life experiences. I'd be really surprised if people's lives unfold on a straight plane at all times. There must be moments where, and these are things sometimes that only happen in real life, you know? So, you know, if I fictionalized what happened, you know, if I fictionalized the fact that she went to prison, and, you know, then somehow someone might be like, oh, that wouldn't have happened, or the fact that the police took me home and it wasn't this violent encounter. You know, sometimes it's weird. You encounter these reductive tropes that are out there, but like, I don't know, as a true account, as debased as that is, as debased as that expression is, you know, I'm convinced that more of our lives are that way.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think what it does really well is kind of it holds those complexities. I think another thing to say is for anyone who's going to be watching this, you almost need to watch the film, I think, 2 or 3 times to start sort of some of the things we're talking about. They'll resonate after you've watched the film, I think, a number of times, because every time I've watched it, things have sort of, I guess, kind of fallen in a different way, or I've had a kind of fuller picture of it. And in part, that's because of the formal sort of ways in which you've kind of set things up. It takes a while for things to kind of percolate, I guess is a good way of describing it, and then settling as well. There were I do think formally things like texture, which we've covered, and its role in kind of creating like emotion and effect like you wanted to, is a key part of what you're trying to do. And I sort of say with your kind of filmmaking more broadly as well. And then pace for me as well, and the space you create for things to fall, and may that be how the viewers, I guess, kind of perceiving and receiving like the information that they're seeing. That felt really key. But I don't want to kind of talk about that too much. I'm just planting that. So again, anyone who's watching this, think about those things, because I think they're really important to your filmmaking as well, Morgan. But I guess what I want to do is kind of close things with two more broader questions, which may be a bit cheesy, but important, which is like, I'm thinking about the films that have come before as well. And I just want to ask you, what as a filmmaker has this film allowed you and afforded you to do more so than the other ones did?
I think move into my own vocabulary more, and I feel as if, maybe every filmmaker feels this way, and so I may be gravely mistaken, but I really feel like this is a film that only I could have made. And, that's not maybe significant for anyone else, but it is significant for me, and I'm really excited and interested in moving deeper into that and exploring the possibilities of that further. And I think, pace is a part of that. I think pace is a particular recognizable hallmark of my filmmaking, and that's one of the things that I sort of discovered while making this, and like that I have a kind of distrust in some ways. I mean, I enjoy looking at other people's films that do this thing that I'm going to denigrate a little bit now for my own self. But, I'm not one of them. I don't make sort of super rich, lush images where you look at the still of the film and you're like, that's going to be amazing. And then you watch it and it sucks, or you watch it and it's just all surface. I'm much more interested in the thing that you may see a still image of it and you think, oh, that's interesting. And you watch it and it keeps unfolding and unfolding and unfolding. I really am excited by that. And I'm excited by the possibility of having someone's attention fixed in a cinema space for a certain amount of time. But also, what does it do when you're in a gallery and then they can walk out and come back in and rewatch it? And, I'm super excited about all of that stuff and trying to, pushing it further in different ways and trying to discover more things that I feel are sort of uniquely mine, so to speak.
There's you've answered the second question, which was like, where do you see the work going? And in answering the first one, you've kind of covered that as well. There's something there though that you've said that makes me think about a comment you made earlier, which was about the participatory viewer, and I was just kind of maybe I'd be interested to, because it made me think about attention and also the time as well that's kind of needed. And I just to get you to kind of talk a bit about that, because I feel like you did manage to do that, or there's a different type of engagement, I would say, rather than participatory engagement that you need. And that's something that you ask for. And again, it's there informally how you've set sort of image to sound, how images kind of evolve during the course of like 13 minutes.
I kind of I feel in some ways when I watch a lot of work, and maybe coming from the sector that we're part of, which is contemporary art world, one of the parameters that people abuse quite a lot is like attention, and we're talking about effect a lot, and like people who make cinema film or whatever may be like, why is there so much emphasis on this? Well, in our sector, it's a bad word, people like the kind of cool, detached, archival exploration one of the things that people abuse a lot is patience. You'll watch a film, nothing really happens, you're asked to attend to not much happening And I want to do the opposite, which is like, I'm asking you to attend, but to a lot happening. So there's a reward, there's a point in you attending to what I'm doing. And it's not just like, you know, watching someone sleep in an Andy Warhol film, which I've got nothing against, but do you know what I mean? I feel like he's done that, but people abuse that idea of attention quite a lot in our sector, that you'll just sit and look at something that's not really doing anything. But you know, nevertheless, how can I explain? So yeah, it is important, I think, to ask the viewer to kind of come into what it is that you're making, you know, to make some effort to view something. And I kind of want to, and also to create an experience that's not just, we've been watching so much stuff this year. Everyone's been watching Netflix, you know, and other streaming providers. I was not just talking about that, but you know, we all watch stuff, it's just washes over you. And I wanted to make something that said, stop, you know, like you need to change the way you're viewing. You know, so that wasn't the whole reason why I made it. See, this is the whole thing about it being dynamic. The whole reason I made the film wasn't so I could do a film that was going to tax how you watch something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it still does that. And yeah, so I think that's important in some ways, because that's one of the privileges of operating in kind of short experimental film, artist moving image, that I have the possibility to maybe ask audiences to do that. And so I feel like it's almost like it would be remiss of me to just produce another film that unfolded in the same experiential way as something that you might see on telly or just online or a DVD. I somehow wanted the viewer to just feel like another cognitive register was being called for. But then once the initial feeling of discomfort subsided, then what would ultimately be the reward was this incredibly rich, effective experience.
I feel like that's a good moment maybe to draw the conversation to a close. But thanks, Morgan. You know, I feel like it's like the start of, you know, very much the beginning of like sort of work that's just going to get richer. So I'm excited, you know, to sort of view that journey over the next few months and years.
Fingers crossed, fingers crossed. And thank you so much, Aman. It's been a really pleasurable experience.
Brilliant.